things. But the difference is now, I think, that people like you are using social media to talk about this.
100%.
You know, you're taking charge of these platforms, you're sharing, you're building communities of people experiencing similar things. And that's really powerful. Like, I didn't have that, let alone my grandfather. When I was here, we suffered these things quietly.
So hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So for today's video, I have a very special guest. She has worked as a correspondent for The Guardian. She's been social affairs editor for Sky News. She's been a barrister, worked on human rights, legal affairs. She's done a lot, and now she's just put out a book which came out last month, I believe.
Yeah, 1st of February.
This is Afua Hirsch with her new book, British. It's such a good book, and we're going to talk about it on today's segment of Read with Miss VARZ. I love this book because it covers a lot of personal stories from you. And you kind of really give us an in-depth understanding of your family life, where you've grown up, Wimbledon, then you came to Oxford and you went exploring in Senegal, you went to Ghana. You really let us understand who you are as an author. You explore race, identity, class, privilege. You talk about bodies, how black bodies are objectified. We're going to get straight into it, and in your first chapter you kind of spoke about history and the origins. I really loved that chapter. That was one of my favourites. So you kind of speak about slavery. You went into a lot of depth about slavery, and I wanted to kind of know your thoughts on why do you think as a nation we kind of choose to celebrate the abolition, like you said, but we kind of forget the involvement and why we were there in the first place. Why are we abolishing something? It's because we're involved. And why do you think we kind of forget that? You even mentioned that there's a children's book that gives slavery one line and it only talks about the abolition in that line. So yeah, why do you think that is?
I think that is a real thing in this country. I call it the cult of Wilberforce.
Yes, yeah.
And I grew up with it, and it actually was very recently that I challenged it, because it was so part of my conditioning to, and you know, not that long ago we had 2007, the bicentenary of the abolition of the international slave trade in 1807. And I think it is part of British identity, this sense that we are the nation that abolished the trade. We're so proud of it. We have genuinely convinced ourselves that that is our legacy. And it is part of British history, but it's only part of British history because of the role that Britain played in inventing, propagating, profiting from this trade. And I think on one level it's fairly straightforward to explain why that's happened. I think that we, in the 20th century, emerged as the nation that saw ourselves as on the right side of history. You know, we were victorious in 2 world wars. We see ourselves, even in the context of empire, as much better than the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish. You know, their empires were really brutal. And look how awful the Belgians were. We were very civilized in our empire. We built roads and hospitals, and we had missionaries helping people to find Jesus. And it's all a very kind of gentlemanly thing. And we've rewritten the story of empire as this very benevolent Edwardian NGO. And I think a lot of people deeply believe in that's what they've been taught in school. They go to African countries and see these very anglicised kind of remnants of empire. And I think it's much more comfortable to believe a history in which you are the do-gooder rather than a history in which you are the oppressor. And I think that people do find it painful. And I see that in the reaction to the book, because people have said to me, look, what do you want from me? Are you trying to blame me? Are you trying to say that I should feel guilty for something that my ancestors did? And that is a really interesting conversation. And I wanted to start a conversation because I don't have the answer as to how we deal with the fact that, you know, this country was deeply complicit and profited from these acts of atrocity. But we're not even talking about them. You know, the one thing I can say with certainty is that ignoring it, not talking about it, and then trying to erase the inconvenient parts of it is not the solution. As to whether I'm trying to kind of convey a sense of personal blame, I think that's something that we need to talk about as a society. And it is an interesting conversation.
I think it's definitely one that needs to be had, because I've grown up doing history. I've always loved history. That was the option I'd always pick during school. But I just never learned anything about my history or how Britain and African countries came into existence with each other. So it was kind of when I turned 15 that I thought, I want to explore my roots. I want to find out. And had I not have gone out of my own way to kind of do the research, I don't think I'd know half of this stuff from school. Definitely not from school anyways. It's kind of a personal journey of finding myself, you know? So,
but these are the things that I think are very, very problematic. You still have to go out of your way to dig up obscure facts about the history of African nations. It's not accessible. You know, even to research the African history in my local environment, I had to really dig deep. It's not information that is made available easily. And why is that? And even if you think about the language that we use, so we're speaking today, it is the independence of, it's the anniversary of Ghana's independence. Happy Ghanaian Independence Day.
I was going to say that.
And well, there are so many things around that. If you just take that as an example, why is that seen as an issue of black history? The independence that Kwame Nkrumah forged for Ghana is British history because it was the beginning of the end of the British Empire in Africa. That had like existential repercussions for Britain and English identities. But it's still seen as an African thing. It's black history. It's for these kind of immigrants to have their little celebration, you know. And I think that is symbolic of the problems in the way that we look at this history. And secondly, the language. We talk about Ghana gaining independence. Like Ghana did not gain independence. Ghana regained independence, you know. And I think the way we talk about it,
what was its
we convey this idea that colonialism was somehow a natural and inevitable state of affairs, and independence was something novel. You know, and it might seem like a subtle point, but I think it betrays a deeper consciousness that we all share. You know, I've been conditioned in that as much as anyone else.
And that's why I have started this segment on my channel, recommending books like this, because if you are a teenager who might not necessarily have that awakening, that moment of I want to explore my roots, you might never know these things. And I think reading books like this, which shares personal stories but also kind of educate people on the history of Britain and various African countries, I think it's really, really important. And I think we, as a nation, should kind of work towards diversifying our curriculums a bit more and kind of opening up history, because you can't just have one narrative.
Exactly.
I think it's detrimental.
It's partly just the danger of a single narrative, you know. Chimamanda always talks about, and I love her too.
In chapter 5, you mentioned that during your time at Oxford, you kind of struggled with feeling comfortable here because for a long time you kind of felt maybe, you know, imposter syndrome, the idea of, do I actually deserve to be here? And you wrote that the atmosphere at Oxford destroyed your confidence, and being surrounded by privileged white peers constantly had to face a sense of otherness all the time. And then you also said that you felt undeserving, and you felt that your personal triumphs and failures would somehow have consequences for every other black student. How did you go about dealing with that feeling? Because I certainly know that amongst my friends and I at the African and Caribbean Society, we talk about this all the time. It's that feeling of, if I fail, it's not just me. I have failed a lot of people, and every time you speak, I feel as though I'm speaking for the entire black race. Whatever V says is gospel for what every black person thinks. And I have to remind everyone, you do know two black people can disagree. Like, we might not, you know?
I think you're spot on, and that's one of the many pressures I think you feel very conscious of as being such a visible minority in Oxford. And I wish I'd known the name for imposter syndrome when I was here. Just even
and Alan taught me.
Having that language would have so helped me. Because I thought, and you know, I felt imposter syndrome in my imposter syndrome. Like, I thought I was the only person experiencing this, and that there was something wrong with me. And I later discovered that so many other people, and not just people of colour, there are so people from working class backgrounds, people who don't come from traditional Oxbridge backgrounds, that they feel that they were not meant to be here, or someone might have made a mistake. It's a very common thing, but by virtue of the phenomenon, you don't connect with other people because you feel the sense of shame about what you're going through. So, for me to be able to write about these things, actually, it does come with quite a sense of liberation, that I feel confident to say these things publicly, and to say, like, this is what I went through, and it's not because there was something wrong with me, or it's not because I wasn't clever enough to be here. All the things that I genuinely believed at the time.
That articulates how a lot of the students here feel, the African and Caribbean students here, because we've spoken about it. And it's just that idea of, okay, so if I fail, then maybe Oxford will think, okay, we were right, black students don't deserve to come here, and then that will kind of be detrimental for everyone else. So when we are sitting our exams, it's kind of, okay, this is for everyone. And I don't know how to shake that feeling.
So my grandfather was here 70 years ago. And it's still happening, and we're still going through the same things. But the difference is now, I think, that people like you are using social media to talk about this.
100%.
You're taking charge of these platforms, you're sharing, you're building communities of people experiencing similar things. And that's really powerful. Like, I didn't have that, let alone my grandfather. When I was here, we suffered these things quietly.
Yeah.
We might try and find safe spaces to discuss them among ourselves or other people, other students going through the same things. But we didn't have ways of connecting, broadcasting,
Yeah.
you know, really putting out there that these are the things that affect students disproportionately if they come from certain backgrounds. It's a long history. Like what you're living and what I lived here is actually part of the history, and I found it actually empowering to know that.
Yeah.
In some ways it was sad that we're still going through some of the same problems.
Yeah.
But on another level it was empowering because it made me realise, you know what, this isn't something that began with me. Like
Yeah,
I
of
am
course.
still struggling in the same way as my ancestors struggled, and you know, as long as we connect with that legacy, we'll know we're working towards something that will change in the future at some point. So when I see you and your generation picking up that challenge and that struggle, it fills me with hope, honestly, because I feel like you're actually making progress. So, you know, so I think there's a lot more to take that's positive than that is disheartening.
It's progress. Just a final quick word. What advice would you give to the various students, all students in Oxford, but specifically students of African and Caribbean descent who feel as though their place here is kind of questioned, or you know, people say, are you sure you're not here just to fill a stat, or is it just a fluke, or are you sure, you know, you're here for your own merit? What kind of advice would you give to those students who feel that they don't belong per se?
I would say, know how ironic that sense is, because there has been a massive intervention in favour of privileged, white, privately educated students here for centuries.
Yeah.
This entire place has been designed to give them an advantage. So the idea that you, if you've overcome the odds to be here, are somehow not deserving is beyond ironic. You know, I think that it's important to know that you are here, you've got to try and own your experience here. And actually, this might not be helpful, but the things that made it so difficult at the time are things that now have given me so much strength.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't for those experiences, I wouldn't have grown in the ways that I have. I wouldn't have developed the consciousness I have. I wouldn't have been able to write this book. I wouldn't have been able to embrace a lot of other experiences. It made me strong. It was hard at the time, but it made me strong. So I think that as long as you go through these things with a spirit of trying to take something positive from them that moves you forward, and not just you, but moves the people you care about forward, and as long as you stay authentic to your experience and confident that you can tell your story, I think that you will emerge on the other side feeling positive about it.
Well, you've heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. This is Afua Hirsch with her new book, British, and thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
It's been so helpful.
Keep doing you, Bee.